We are 16 lines down from the top. You'll see there's an asterisk at the beginning of the line. And we're at the end of the line. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Having said that, I do want to go back, please, to Yud Omid Aleph, just to look at the Mishnah, just to remind ourselves of the Mishnah. Mishnah is about 6 lines up from the bottom of the Omid. You see the Mishnah? We were talking about things which puzzle a sukkah. Said the Mishnah, Peirus aleha sadim mipnei achama. If you were to spread a sheet over the top of your schach on the outside of the sukkah in order to protect it from the heat, from the sun, or tachteh mipnei hanesher, or underneath it on the inside of the schach, on the inside of the sukkah, underneath the schach, to catch any falling leaves. Oy shepires al gabe hakinuf pesula, or you were to spread a sheet on a kinuf. We'll come to that, what that is in a moment. Then it's possible. Then the sukkah is possible, or really what it means is that your fulfillment of the mitzvah is possible because you're not in a kosher sukkah. Aval peres hu al gabe naklitze ha-mitzvah. However, you could spread a sheet over naklitze ha-mitzvah. Again, we'll see what that is. So let's look at we've got these 2 things we need to remember, which is a kinuf and naklitzin. Says Rashi, towards the bottom of the page. Let me have a look in mine, it's easy to see in mine. Oh yeah, al gabe kinuf. Here it is, in the middle of the line. So 2 lines down after the word masnisin here, al gabe kinuf. What is a kinuf, says Rashi? Hein dalad kondisin ledalad ragle hamita. These are, it's basically a 4-poster bed. These are 4 posts at the foot of the bed. V'govohim umaniach, and they high, they stand up high above the bed. Umaniach kolunasos mizu lezu al gabehem, and you put like beams on top of them from here to here, so all the way around the bed. Uperes aleim sadin, and then you spread a sheet over the top of it, so it hangs. You've got, this is the key factor. It hangs. It creates a roof over the top of the bed and then hangs down. And therefore, the person who's on the bed underneath this covering is distanced from the schach. And therefore, you're not in the shade of the schach. Rather, you are underneath something which is makabel tumah, susceptible to tumah, because it's a kli, a sheet is susceptible to tumah. Mifsala, therefore, it's possible. Because there you're not using the schach because it's been covered over. Okay, so that is a kinuf, a 4-poster bed that has a sheet spread over the top of it with a roof. Pesula, why, says Rashi? Basically what it is, you've got a tent, you've pitched a tent inside your sukkah, and you're not sitting in your sukkah, you're sitting in a tent that happens to be inside a sukkah, and that clearly is not sufficient. Aval, carry on Rashi, pores hu al gabe niklitze amita. However, if you spread a sheet over niklitze amita, says Rashi, she'enan ela shnayim. Here we've only got 2 posts. And they are at the 2 ends of the bed, but in the middle of the bed. So you can imagine the end of a bed. Here's the end. In the middle of the end of the bed is a post standing up. So let's say that's the bed, the flat bed. Here's a post at the end of the bed there, and another one there. Well, actually, it should be that way around, right? There and there. So it runs from back to front, or the top of the bed to the bottom of the bed. Says Rashi. One at the head and one at the foot. V'nosim kulusna mizulazeh, and you run one beam down the middle. So you've got here, top of the bed, bottom of the bed, these two posts, and then running along the bed, obviously above it, a height above it, just resting on top of the two posts, is a beam. Yeah. Find the Rashi again. You spread a sheet over it. It slants from one side to the other. Right? There's no roof because the beam is thin, and therefore the material just drapes down over it like that. It says the next line of Rashi, umishum te'ein lagar tefach rachav lemala lon mikre ohel. And since you don't have a roof of at least a width of a tefach above you, it's not considered to be an ohel, not considered to be a tent, and therefore you could be underneath that, and it would still be fine in your sukkah. Okay, so we're clear on the distinction. That's really important because we're going to be looking at it as we go on. So a kinuf is a four-poster bed with a sheet spread over it. It has a full roof over the top of you. It's as if you're in the tent in your sukkah and not in the sukkah at all. Whereas the naklitzin is a two-poster bed with a very a triangular shape of material hanging down. Doesn't have the din of a gug of a roof because it's not wide enough, and therefore it's almost subsumed. It's immaterial, pretty much. Okay, that was what the Mishnah said. Now let's go to our Gemara. Okay, so Yud Omid base, 16 lines down, end of the line. Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So Shmuel says, "Mutter leishan bekila b'sukkah, afal pish yesh la gag." So now we've had two things so far. We've got a kinuf, four-poster bed. We've got an aklitin, a two-poster bed. We've now got something called a kila. Says Shmuel, you're permitted to sleep under a kila or in a kila in a sukkah, even though it has a roof. That's because as long as it's not 10 tefachim high. So it doesn't have, according to Shmuel, even though it's got a roof, since it's less than 10 tefachim high, it's not considered to be an ohel. Because remember we've said right at the back of the beginning, that a mechitza, that a wall has a definition of wall only if it's a minimum of 10 tefachim high. Similarly, a sukkah is only kosher if it has at least walls of 10 tefachim high. Any lower than that is not considered to be, not considered to be walls. So what is this kila? Look at Rashi on the left-hand side. Here we go. Kila, says Rashi, haprusa svivos hamita. This is material which has been spread around the bed. So the bed is enclosed by this material, a little bit like mosquito nets, right? Yeah, but this is a solid material. V'afal pi sheyesh la gag she'ein gaga meshufa kashel naklitin, and even though it's got a roof of at least a tefach, and it doesn't slant like the roof of the klitin did, ela shave kashel kinofes. Rather, it's similar to the kinofes. So we've got three things now. We've got the kinofes, which is the four-poster bed, encircled all on sides and on top. We've got the naklitin, which is the triangular draped bed with one beam going across, and we've got this a kila, which is like in between the two. So it has the roof-like structure of the kinuf, but it doesn't have the height of the kinuf. It's called a kila. Okay? Okay, so says the Gemara. Go back in the Gemara. Even though it has a roof, it's permitted because as long as it's less than 10 tefachim. And since it's less than 10 tefachim, it's not considered anything. Says Rashi, so as long as the material is not higher than 10 tefachim above the bed itself, says Rashi, anything less than 10 tefachim is not considered to be a tent. So even though it has a roof, since it doesn't have the height of 10 tefachim, it's not considered to be a tent. Okay? Says the Gemara. Gemara is now going to challenge this. Says the Gemara, Tashima. But let's come and learn it from a brisa. Says the brisa, Ayashem bekila b'sukkah lo yetzei yidei chovaso. So completely opposite to what Shmuel said. We have a brisa that says that somebody who sleeps in a kila, this third type of structure, in a sukkah, has not fulfilled their obligation, meaning it's possible. So what we're dealing with here seems to be completely contrary to what we said. Says, well, no, we're dealing here with Kshevoa Asara. That's easy to answer. The brisa was talking about when the kila has a height of 10 tefachim. Then we would say, no, even Shmuel would say that it now has a din of an ohel and it's possible. That's not the case that Shmuel brought here. So challenge number one is averted. Gemara continues. Meisvei, where there's an asterisk. Yeah? Gemara now quotes from a Mishnah. Mishnah later on Chaf Omad Beis, says the Mishnah, Yashem tachat hamita b'sukkah, someone who sleeps under a bed in a sukkah, lo yidei yisei chovasoy, hasn't fulfilled their obligation. So if you sleep under your bed in the sukkah, you would not have fulfilled your obligation of leishev asukah. Now, so how can Shmuel say that if you sleep in a bed which has been covered with a cloth and it has a roof, very much like the bed itself will be acting as a roof for those sleeping underneath it, how would you say that you would have fulfilled the obligation? So says the Gemara, Shmuel's already answered this by saying, that was talking about the Mishnah there on Chof Amud Beis, is talking about where the bed itself is 10 tefachim high. If you're under such a bed as that, then of course the bed is acting as an ohel, and you would offer the obligation. But if the bed is lower than that, then you would. Same here, as Shmuel said. If you're in the bed, and the bed is covered by material, as long as it's less than 10 tefachim high, it's not considered to be an ohel, because minimum dimensions for an ohel are 10 tefachim. Therefore, there's no difference, no contradiction. Okay, so that's challenge number 2 dealt with. Says the Gemara, Tashuma, but let's learn it from another brisa. Or Shapiris al gabe kinofas. Actually, it's our Mishnah, sorry. Let's learn it from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, Osha Pires al Gabe Kinofas Basula. Our Mishnah said that if you were to spread a sheet over Kinofas, a 4-poster bed, then it's possible. No mention of dimensions of how high it is. It just says because it's got a roof, it's possible. So how can Shmuel say, this kila is fine as long as it's less than 10 tefachim? We don't seem to be bothered about whether it's 10 tefachim or not. We seem to be bothered with is there a covering which considered to be like a roof? So it says the Gemara, Hasam Nami to go Gavi Asara. No, our mission is also talking about when the kinofus is at a height of 10 tefachim. So if the material is 10 tefachim above the bed, or some say actually even above floor height, then that would be considered to be an ohel. And then if you were sleeping in that, the kinofus, you would be, that's why you're apostle, because it's above 10 tefachim. Yeah. Says the Gemara, hold on a second. Vaha lo ketani hachi. But that's not what it said. That's not what's taught in a brisa. The Sanyan is taught in a brisa. Naklitin shnayim. Naklitin is the two-poster bed with the triangular material. Shnayim, that's got two posts. V'kinofus arba. Whereas the kinofus is a four-poster bed with the roof of material on top. Says the Brisa, Perus al gabe kinofus pasula. If you were to spread a sheet over the four posts of the kinofus, then it's possible. However, al gabe neklitin kashera. But if you were to spread it over the two-poster bed, then it's kosher. Ubilvad, says the Brisa, spells it out. As long as the beams of the naklitin are not higher than 10 tefachim, says the Gemara. Michlal, from this implies the kinofus af al pi she'ein gevoim asara. That would imply that when it comes to the kinofus, that even if it's lower than 10 tefachim, it would still be possible. Do you understand what the Brisa is saying? The Brisa makes a distinction. It says that the naklitin, the two-poster bed, it doesn't have a roof and it has a slanting material. As long as it's lower than 10 tefachim, it's kosher.
So we're talking about the posts here. The Gemara is talking about the posts as being the relevant problem here. We're thinking just about the cover. Is that right?
Well, we're challenging Shmuel, because Shmuel made a statement which is, as long as any cover, any roof, false roof, is less than 10 tefachim, you're okay. We said, hold on a second. Our Mishnah didn't say that. And in fact, a Brisa seems to be even more explicit. Although you could say the Mishnah doesn't specify, and therefore you can make a distinction and say, the Mishnah meant when it said the four-poster is possible, that meant when it was 10 tefachim high, but anything less than that, it wouldn't be possible. You can't say that because we've got a Brisa that clearly says that a naklitin, the two-poster bed, as long as it's less than 10 tefachim, you're okay. But a kinofus, even if it's less than 10 tefachim, it's still no good. So it doesn't. Right. So according to the Brisa, it doesn't seem to be a factor with the height of the kinofus or not. Once you've got a proper roof spread over four posts, regardless of the height, it's considered to be an ohel, and it will be possible. Just look at Rashi. Yeah, says Rashi here. Ha at the end of the line. Says the Gemara, you can't say that the Mishnah meant that the kenofis is only possible when it's more than 10 tefachim. That's not what the Mishnah says, and that's definitely not what the Brisa teaches. Says the Gemara, says Rashi, but Brisa the mefarish lehu begava. Although the Mishnah itself didn't specify, wasn't mefarish, wasn't explicit when it talked about the height of the kenofis, the four-poster bed, the Brisa certainly was. As it said, the naklitzin is with two posts, as we've explained, the L. Yotzim be'emsa mitzah l'miroshoseha meraglaseha. It runs from down the middle of the bed from head to foot. Yeah. Whereas the kinofus, which is four posts all around the bed with a roof, even if it's less than 4 to 10 tefachim, it is possible. So we have a problem with Shmuel, because Shmuel seems to say the defining factor is it 10 tefachim or not? Whereas we have a Brisa that seems to say it's immaterial whether it's 10 tefachim or not. Once you've got a roof over four posts, then it's possible. So let's see how the Gemara resolves it. Go down slightly. So says the Gemara here, middle of the line, shiny. Says the Gemara, shiny kenofus. The kenofus, the four-poster bed, is different to kibaye, because it has a permanence to it. Look at Rashi. Rashi says in a second. Since it has four posts, and then the material over it, it has a certain status already, a certain permanence to it. which we can't discount by just saying, oh, well, since it's less than 10 tefachim, it's not considered to be an ohel. No.
Are you bringing it into the sukkah, or are you talking about making a sukkah around it? That depends whether you're actually moving the bed.
No, we're saying this, it's in the sukkah.
So the bed has been moved.
What's the issue? What's the?
Well, you said it has a semblance of being permanent.
No, sorry. Let me clarify. What I mean by that is the way the kinofis is constructed in a permanent way, meaning these posts aren't detachable posts. Yeah, it's not a piece of IKEA furniture which you can assemble and it falls apart. No, I mean that it's temporary. Right, this is something which is it's been crafted like this. It's made, when they deliver it in one piece. They'll have to crane it through. They have to take the roof off your house and crane it in, right?
Yeah. So how do you get it into your sukkah? I don't understand. If it's so difficult.
Well, okay. I may be exaggerating here. It may be that you build it in situ, but once you build it, it is permanent. Meaning that these posts are firmly attached to the bed. Yeah?
Okay.
They are integral to it. And therefore they create a permanent type of structure. And once you've got that permanence to it, that permanence seems to take precedence over the height. We seem to have two factors at play here. We know that as soon as something is 10 tefachim high, regardless of how permanent it is, it has a din of an ohel. It's a mechitza. We now seem to be saying, this is the chiddush here the Gemara is introducing, which is that if something has a certain level of permanence to it in the way it's constructed, regardless of its height, it can be considered as an ohel in its own right.
That makes sense, because obviously a sukkah is supposed to be a temporary dwelling. Therefore, if you put something permanent in there, it changes the can't think of the word, but it changes the purpose. Yeah, it makes it a permanent purpose rather than a temporary purpose.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. Although it's not actually changing the sukkah itself. But it's changing the activity that goes in it. Like, because if the sukkah disappears, then you're left with a permanent, something permanent there, which is a problem. Yeah, true. And whilst it's inside the sukkah, it supersedes the sukkah.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you're underneath, if you're in that, your dwelling is dwelling in a permanent structure.
Yeah.
Which is possible because you can't use sheets as schach.
Yeah.
And therefore, you can't fulfill your obligation. Yeah. The chiddush is that it attains a level of permanency regardless of its height, by dint of its manufacture, of the way it's made. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, look at Rashi. So Rashi says, because of its permanence, aval kila. So remember, we've got three things here. We had the kinofus, the four-poster permanent bed. We've got the naklitzin, the two-poster bed with the triangular material, and the kila. The kila, we said, is like the kinofus because it's got the flat roof. What's the difference, says Rashi? Aval kila lo kavia, b'chazaka kinofus. The kila is not like the kinofus in its assumption of or its where we treat it like it's permanent. Hilcha ki lo gavoa asara lo chashiv, and therefore when it comes to the kila, if it doesn't have 10 tefachim, it's not posel. It doesn't invalidate the sukkah. That's the distinction. That's the third category. Yeah? Let's take it really quick, simply. First category is that of naklitzin, triangular, no roof. We don't really care about the height of it at the moment, and therefore it doesn't possible the sukkah. Position number two is that of the kila. The killer is, it doesn't have the height of the kinofes, but it doesn't have the permanence of the kinofes. Its beams aren't attached in a way that are integral to the bed itself. They are in some way more detachable. And therefore, for that to be considered to be an ohel, that will require a minimum of 10 tefachim. Third stage is kenofus. Kenofus is such a permanent structure with a roof that even if it's less than 10 tefachim, it's possible. Do you understand the distinction? Yeah, that's why Shmuel differs from our brisa. Shmuel is dealing with a killer. Shmuel says a killer, unless it's got 10 tefachim, it's not considered to be permanent, even though it shares some features of the kinofis. It doesn't have that permanency because the way it's constructed, and therefore, if it doesn't have the 10 tefachim, it wouldn't posel the sukkah. Whereas the kinofis, regardless if it has 10 tefachim or not, because in essence it is a permanent structure, immediately you spread the thing over it, it becomes posel. Okay, so says the Gemara. Yeah, the Gemara doesn't give up. The Gemara says, well, hold on a second, we're talking about permanency. V'harei, he's big in the line. V'harei sukkah al gabe sukkah to gaviyah. Hold on a second. Remember, we spent a lot of time talking about a sukkah on top of a sukkah. Now, how does a sukkah, now, and I know it seems a bit contradictory because we say a sukkah isn't permanent, but it has to have a certain element of permanency to it, in that it can't be so flimsy or so poorly constructed that it wouldn't survive a ruach matsui, an average wind, but also it has to have certain minimum dimensions of permanency. One being mechitzas of 10 tefachim, 2 and a bit walls of at least 10 tefachim. Once it has that, it has the din of kvius, of permanency needed to be considered to be a sukkah. So when we talked about a sukkah on top of another sukkah, the starting point for the upper sukkah to posel the lower one is that the upper one has a certain level of kvius, which is 10 tefachim. Yeah? V'harei sukkah al gabe sukkah to kaviyah. And yet, when it comes to, we know that when there's sukkah on top of a sukkah, there is a certain amount of permanency to it. V'amar Shmuel, and Shmuel said, we saw this last time, I thought, or previously, kehechshera kach basula. Shmuel himself said that just as what makes it kosher also makes the other thing posel, meaning whatever makes the same thing that makes the upper sukkah kosher, meaning it has 10 tefachim walls, high walls, that's the very thing that will make the lower one posel. Look at Rashi. Kechshera kach pasula, says Rashi, kol kama to lo mikraya elyona sukkah lo mifsala tachtona. Rashi puts it the other way around. Anything that wouldn't be enough to call the upper one a kosher sukkah wouldn't be enough to posel the lower one. Meaning, if the upper one doesn't have walls of 10 tefachim, meaning it's not kosher itself, then it couldn't posel the lower one. Only those things which will make the upper one kosher could posel the lower one. But if it hasn't got those things which make the upper one kosher, it can't make the lower one posel. Okay, so it must be, even according to Shmuel, that you need 10 tefachim. So answers to Amri Hasam, so there they say, to the mafsil sukkah ba'asara. We make a distinction. When it comes to poseling a sukkah, you need those dimensions of 10. Hacha, whereas here, to the shavuay, to shaviyay, oyala, batzim me'asara, nami have ohala. Whereas here, when we're trying to establish what is an ohel, what is considered to be a tent, then we'd say even less than 10 tefachim is also considered to be a tent. Look at Rashi. Hacha to the shaviyay ohala, shlo yashem taktav. Here, when we're trying to establish what are the things under which you should not sleep, then we would say even less than 10 tefachim. Aval shah sukkah kashera, but the rest of the sukkah is kosher. Batzir, whereas Batzir mi'asara nami have ohala heicha to gavia. Whereas even if it was less than 10 tefachim, if it has a permanence, then it will be posel. So it's a very interesting chiddush we're making here. Although to make something posel, that's when we're talking about a sukkah, making a sukkah posel. But when we're talking about what defines an ohel, a tent, we don't need to say it needs at least 10 tefachim. What we can say is even less than 10 tefachim, but if it has a certain level of kavias, of permanency, that would posel the sukkah. Yeah, and that's the difference. The kila doesn't have that level of permanency, even though it has the dimensions of it, and therefore its requirement would be 10 tefachim, whereas kinofus, since it has that permanency to it, it doesn't need the dimensions of 10 tefachim to be considered an ohel, and it would automatically posel the sukkah. Okay? Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yes, that's good.
Good. Now, let's move on slightly. Let's quote another teaching in the name of Shmuel, tangential to what we're learning. It says the Gemara, Amar Rav Tachlifa bar Abimi, Amar Shmuel. So Rav Tachlifa bar Abimi said the name of Shmuel. Hashem bekila arum. If a person was sleeping naked in this kila, this enclosed bed, Motse Rosha chutz the kila, v'kore kriya shema. They could put their head outside of the covers and say the Shema. What's going on here? Look at Rashi. It's the last Rashi on the page, 5 lines up from the bottom. V'kore kriya shema. Says the Rashi. So even if you have nothing, you're not wearing anything in bed. If you were to put your head outside of the curtain that's at the edge of the bed, you could say the Shema, says Shmuel. Why? To kiven to love ohelhu, because since this isn't considered to be an ohel, so why? Because the killer doesn't have the permanency of an ohel according to Shmuel. Lo aminun lemakon sheruba sham rosho nizra. We don't say that the head is considered to be wherever the majority of the body is. Velista, and it needs to hide. Because we say that you mustn't see a naked thing. Meaning you cannot say that according to halacha, you cannot say certain tefillahs in the presence of people who are undressed and yourself. If a person is in a state of undress, they cannot say certain tefillahs. Right? Now we say that the head being attached to the rest of the body goes according to where the majority of the body is. If the majority of the body is in a separate entity, meaning it is within an ohel, then we say the head is separate to it. But if the majority of the body is not in a separate place, then we wouldn't say that then the head would be considered to be attached to it as it is, but notionally, not only notionally, but in reality attached to it and not separate. Sorry, what I mean is not separate from it. You cannot separate your head from the rest of your body, and if they're within the same structure. Okay? Just Rashi carries on.
So that's nothing to do with sukkah, is it now? We're just talking about a general situation.
Yeah. But it's, I said it's tangential to this whole din of OL, excuse me. Says Rashi, no, that would be considered to be as if you put your head outside of your shirt. Yeah? That would be considered to be a separate position, right? You're wearing a shirt. Underneath your shirt, obviously you have nothing else on. But because you've got a shirt on, it's a kli within it in its own right, Your head, which protrudes from that, is considered to be separate from your uncovered body, which is covered by something separate to yourself. And therefore, that's why you're perfectly permitted to say the Shema in that situation. Yeah. But that's only if what the rest of the body is covered in has its own status, either a piece of clothing or an ohel. According to Shmuel, and the killer doesn't have a din of an ohel because it doesn't have permanency and or height, and therefore putting your head outside of it doesn't make any difference because the killer is not acting as a sufficient barrier, separate domain to where your head is. And in that situation, halacha says that your head is treated like the rest of your body, and therefore the head is in a place where there is nakedness. You cannot say the Shema. Does that make sense?
So just on that point, are you saying that if you were in a tent naked, but you stuck your head outside the tent,
yeah,
you could say the Shema under those circumstances?
If the tent is minimum of 10 tefachim high.
If the tent's a real tent and not interpreted.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. With a roof and 10 tefachim, yes.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. And that's why Shmuel is saying you can't do that here. No, sorry. Shmuel is, apologies, my fault. Let me just clarify. Shmuel holds you could do that here. Let's go back again. No, sorry, he says loy. Let's No, sorry. Go back again. Amar Shmuel, Hayasha Bekila Aru Motzi Rosh Chutz Lekila V'Korei Kriyas Shema. Yeah, no, sorry. According to Shmuel would say you could put your head outside of the kila and say the Shema. We're now going to challenge that based on what we've just been saying. Yeah, says the Gemara, Meisvei. The Gemara challenges that. Says the Gemara, based on the Brisa, Hayashe Bekila Arum. Someone sleeping naked in a kila. Lo say Rosh Chutz Lekila. They cannot put their head outside of the kila and say the Shema. Because, says Rashi, to Kivan. We saw that Rashi. Says the Gemara. So we have a machlokus between Shmuel and this Brisa. So says the Gemara, but my askinan. What are we dealing with here? Says the Gemara, Kashugavoha Asara. We're talking about where the difference is when it is 10 tefachim high. Yeah? If it's 10 tefachim high, you cannot put your head out of it. If it's less than that, then you can. Says the Gemara, Hachinami mistabra. We can also infer that logically. Mitzakatani sefer from the fact that the Brisa at the end of the Brisa it says, Ha lama zeh domer leomed bebayis arum. What is this comparable to? So someone standing naked in their house. They can't then stick their head out of the window to say the Shema. V'yikra kriyas Shema. Shema mina. So we infer from that here also. Here also that's no good. Once something has the din of an ohel, you cannot separate yourself from it by sticking your head out of the window or out of the cover, the material, because you're considered to be all inside it. Whereas Shmuel, look at the bottom, Tosfos at the bottom of the page, right at the bottom, last one. Motzi Rosha Chutz Lekila V'Korei Kriyas Shema. Lo Chaya Shmuel Liboy Roeh Es Ha'eva. Shmuel doesn't seem to be bothered by the fact that a person's heart can see their nakedness. There doesn't seem to be a sufficient covering of it. Yeah. So then that's what Rashi was saying, that since, according to Shmuel, since the killer doesn't have the din of an ohel, we're not restricted by this idea of the head following after the rest of the body and not being separate to it. He would say, no, it's just like the same, it's the same as you sticking your head out of your shirt. yeah, which is considered to be sufficient according to Shmuel. Okay, so Gemara carries on. We now go on to Yud Aleph Omid Aleph. I didn't want to go back down to the missions tonight, but let's see. Next onward. Says the Gemara, Ubayis Nami. In fact, some say, Rashi says here, Nami, take out the word Nami because they're not sure what it's saying here. So it's a separate issue, says Rashi. It's a different teaching on it, completely separate teaching. The Lord Tamer bias kakila. The Gemara is not trying to suggest that a house is like this kila, this four-poster bed, which is not permanent. Right, rather, the Gemara says, "Ubayis af al pi she'en gavoa asara." A house, even if it's not 10 tefachim, kiven tkavia ohelahu. A house, even if it doesn't have the dimensions of 10 tefachim, it already has a certain level of permanence to it. The logara mikinofis, and therefore it's no worse than the kinofis, the four-poster bed. So we see that height, when it comes to permanency, height isn't a factor because a house, even if is not 10 tefachim high, is already considered to be a permanent structure. And it can be no worse than the kinofis, the four-poster bed, which we said, because that has a certain permanence to it, we're not concerned about its dimensions, its height. Okay. Now, having said all we've said up to now, second line of the Gemara on Yud Aleph Omid Aleph says, Lishnachuna. There's another way of reading this whole teaching of Shmuel. Amrei la Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So they said that Rav Yehuda said the name of Shmuel. Mutilation bekilas chasanim besukkah lefi she'ena gag afal pi shkevoa asara. So look at this carefully. Shmuel, we're now saying that Shmuel's taught the following. The person is permitted to sleep in a bridal canopy bed in a sukkah because it doesn't have a roof, even though it is 10 tefachim high. So now we've redefined a kila. Previously we said a kila has a roof like a kinofis, but is not permanent like a kinofis. And therefore, if it's less than 10 tefachim, it's not considered to be an ohel. Now we're saying there's a thing called a kilas chasanim. Look what Rashi says. Rashi says here, kilas chasanim, end of the third wide line. Eina kashar kila, it's not like the other kila. Ve'ein osim la gag. Now this one doesn't have a roof. Vehi sevivos hamita, it surrounds the bed. V'gaga mushufa kashel naklitin. Its roof is slanted like the naklitin. Yeah, so we've got now a fourth type of structure. Yeah, it's somewhere in between the kinofis and the naklitin. It doesn't have a roof like the naklitin. It's slanted. Yeah. It's a little bit like the kinofis, but it's more like the naklitin. So says the Gemara. So according to Shmuel, the person will be permitted to sleep in such a structure since it doesn't have a roof, even if it's 10 tefachim high. So it would appear that Shmuel is now saying, what is the defining feature? Permanency or roof or height? It's roof. Since it doesn't have a roof, even though it's 10 tefachim, doesn't have a din of an ohel. And therefore you can sleep under it. Says the Gemara, now we're going to go, it's almost a mirror of what we did previously, but now looking at this different definition of a kila. Says the Gemara says, Meisvei raises an objection based on a brisa. The brisa said someone who sleeps in a kila, in a sukkah has not fulfilled their obligation. It's possible. Says the Gemara, and what are we dealing with here? The Brisa was talking about where the killer had a roof. Shmuel's killer doesn't have a roof, and therefore it's not possible. Says the Gemara, challenge number 2. Tashema, we learned in the Mishnah on Chafamad Beis, Naklitin Shenayim V'Kinofus Arba, a bed, the 2-poster bed is a Naklitin, the Kinofus is a 4-poster bed. Peres al Gabay Kinofus Pasula, if you spread a sheet over the Kinofus, it's possible. Al Gabay Naklitin Kashera, but if you did it over the Naklitin, the bed without a roof, it's kosher. Ubilvad shlo yiyu naklitin gavoim min hamitza asara tefachim, as long as the naklitin does not reach the height of 10 tefachim. So we see we've got naklitin, a type of killer, less than 10 tefachim, which is okay. Says Gemara, Hagavoim min hamitza asara pasula, which would mean if it does reach the height of 10 tefachim, it is possible. Afal pi she'ein la gag, even though it doesn't have a roof. Whereas Shmuel said that since it doesn't have a roof, even if it's 10 tefachim, it's possible. It's kosher. We're now saying, although it doesn't have a roof, if it's 10 tefachim, it's possible. Again, seems to completely contradict what Shmuel said. So answers the Gemara as we did previously. Shiny naklitin. The difference is a naklitin to kavi'i. The naklitin has a certain type of permanency to it, whereas the killer that Shmuel is talking about doesn't. Okay, that's the difference. The killer that Shmuel talks about doesn't have a roof, and therefore, even if it's 10 tefachim high, it's kosher. That's because it doesn't have a permanency of the naklitin. Now, what's the problem with that answer? What did we say previously about that naklitin? What distinction did we draw between the naklitin and the kinofes, the 2-poster and the 4-poster? We said the 4-poster was what?
It's permanent.
Permanent. And we said the 2-poster
were not.
Was temporary. Now we're saying that naklitin is permanent. The killer is temporary. Says the Gemara. Sorry, I should have told you where we're on the page. Yeah, here, right here, which is where we were here. Says the Gemara. So says the Gemara, if you're saying that the naklitin has a permanency, then it's like a kinofus. And what do we say about kinofus? That it's possible even if it's less than 10 tefachim, because it has a roof. Not because it has a roof, but because it's permanent.
I think the word canopy comes from kinofus.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I'm sure it does. Kinope, yeah.
Is it Greek? Do you know what it is? It's not Hebrew.
I'm sure it's not Hebrew. Yeah, I'm sure it's not.
Because kanaf is with a cuff, isn't it? Kanfei hanasharim.
Yeah.
A wing is with a cuff.
What was it? Was it
This is a kuf.
Yeah, but sometimes they're interchangeable.
Kanaf or kanfei.
On kanfei b'dehem. On the
That's right. On the edges, on the wings, but it's not really. It's a cuff, not a kuf.
Yeah.
That's why I wondered.
Yeah. So it may.
Sorry,
no, it's fine. I mean, sometimes they're interchangeable because phonetically they're the same.
Well, they're not really, because a kuf is a Q, not a K. That's that because the Arabic is different, so that comes out like that. Anyway, maybe.
Yeah, look, again, I'm sure they're not. These aren't Hebrew words. These are Aramaic words, which may have sources in other languages for sure.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. But the point that we're trying to get here is we've just the way we try to work our way out of this problem with Shmuel is by saying a killer is different to a naklitin. Why? Because kila is temporary, naklitzin is permanent. On the second, we can't say that because we've previously defined naklitzin as temporary and kinofos as permanent. Says the Gemara, if you're saying that naklitzin is permanent, then it's permanent like a kinofos. So says the Gemara, hold on a second. Nothing's binary here in Gemara, right? You've got permanence, you've got permanence, right? You've got temporary, you've got temporary. Says Gemara, legabe kinofos lo kivii. In relation to the kinofos, the naklitzin is not permanent. Legabe kila kivii. But in comparison to the kila, the naklitzin is permanent. So we've got 3 stages again. Kinofos, permanent, really permanent. Yeah, you're good quality. I don't know what's the name of that furniture, handmade. Not Wedgwood. Okay, really good.
Chippendale.
Chippendale, that's right. Chippendale, that's right. Chippendale, solid, right? Solid, good. Goisha furniture, right? Starker, right? Permanent. Then you've got naklitzin. It's it's not your IKEA, but it's not your Chippendale, right? It's it's John Lewis, right? And so it's permanent in comparison to the IKEA, but when you can't compare it to the Chippendale, right? And then you've got the killer, which is your flat pack furniture, right? Okay, so we've got degrees of permanency. Kinofos is A grade permanent, and naklitzin is B grade, and kila is completely temporary. Okay. So that's how we worm our way out of that issue, and then says the Gemara, Darash. The Rush Rabba bar Rav Huna. Rabba bar Rav Huna expounds, Mutzalei shein bekila, afar pi sheyesh lo gag. You're permitted to sleep in a kila in a sukkah, even though it's got a roof. Afar pi shegavoa asara, and even though it has the height of 10 tefachim. Says the Gemara, Kaman. Who's that go according to? Says an answer, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda. It's not Rabbi Yehuda. So Amma, as Rabbi Yehuda say, it's a Mishnah on Chaf Aleph, on Chaf, I think it is, or Chaf Aleph. Amma, lo atzi ohel arai u'mevatel ohel keva. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion of this, that a temporary structure can't come along and be mevatel, negate a permanent structure. What does he mean here? I thought there was a Rashi. Let's have a look. Let's just have a look on Chaf Aleph, Omid Aleph. I think it's on the base. More there explain what he's talking about. If you look on Chaf Aleph Omid base, the Gemara there says that, and I know we said at the beginning that a sukkah by definition is alright, it's temporary, it's only there for 7-8 days. At the same time, it has to have a certain aspect of keva, because we say Teishu Ke'enka Tadura, that we dwell in a sukkah in the same way as we dwell in our house. So the sukkah for the 8 days has to have a certain level of permanency, which supersedes anything which you're going to be putting in there. So the bed, which is purely a temporary structure for the time it's in the sukkah, is considered to be more temporary than the sukkah itself. And Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, which is something which is more temporary in nature, cannot come along with mevatel something which is more permanent in nature. So even if you were to sleep underneath this bed, since it's only temporary, it's not negating the permanency of the sukkah, meaning it doesn't have a significance in comparison to the sukkah itself. Okay? Does that make sense? And therefore he would say that even if this killer is 10 tefachim high, and even if it has a roof, which by all means everyone would agree that now has a din of an ohel, Rabbi Yehuda say that may be the case. But since it's arai, since it is only a temporary ohel, it cannot negate the permanent sukkah itself. And therefore, it wouldn't be possible. Says the Gemara, Disnan, as it's taught in a Mishnah, and that's Mishnah on Chaf Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Noagin hayinu le'yeshem tachat hamitzah b'fnei hazakenim. We used to, he said, we used to sleep underneath the bed in the presence of the elders, and they didn't say anything. I think Rashi says, I think it's in the Mishnah. Again, we'll go to Chaf Amud base, 20b. It's the new beginning of the Peirik there. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that. Says the Mishnah, the Tanakhama in the Mishnah says, if you sleep underneath a bed in the sukkah, you've not fulfilled your obligation. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, our Rabbi Yehuda says, we used to sleep under the bed in the presence of the elders. They didn't say anything to us, meaning they didn't object. And says Rashi there, time in Mefarish b'Gemara, the Gemara will explain the reason, which is the lo arsi ohel aray mevasal ohel keva, because Rabbi Yehuda was the opinion, which is a temporary structure cannot negate a permanent structure. The bed compared to the sukkah is temporary. So says the Gemara, back on our Gemara. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda is where the asterisk is. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. And they didn't say anything. Yeah, and if you look at Rashi here, the mitzvah, says Rashi, the bed, legabe sukkah, in relation to the sukkah, ohel arahu, is considered to be temporary. The bed is considered to be, if we compare it, when we compared, like for example, when we compared the naklitin to the kinofes and that to the kila, we said one comparative to the other corresponding to the other. It depends what it is. A bed comparable to the sukkah is considered to be temporary. Why? Says Rashi, because the bed gets moved around. Yeah, the bed is a movable object within the sukkah.
And that's the point I made before, and that would apply even if it had 4 posts.
That's what it would appear.
That's what Rashi is saying, right?
Yeah. Not the kinofis though. The kinofis, because that itself has a certain permanence to it.
But that's what 4 posts is. That is kinofis.
Yeah, but we're saying a kila here. Again,
kila, okay.
A kila which has a certain type of permanence, but not a full permanence. It has the dimensions, 10 tefachim, and a roof, but because it doesn't have the permanence, it's subsumed by, it does not supersede the sukkah, because it's moved from place to place. You know, any of the movable objects within the sukkah, regardless of their dimensions, do not take precedence over the sukkah itself, because the sukkah doesn't move. Right? So that seems to be a new feature. It's about the permanence defined by movability. Yeah.
And how would you translate kila then? What is it? A screen or it's not a curtain, is it?
Again,
enclosure maybe.
Right.
Kolel maybe,
Mechil is a container.
Right, there you go.
Mechal.
Yeah, so your enclosure are contained within it. Yeah. But still, because it's movable, it's not it's considered to be temporary in comparison to the sukkah, which is considered to be, which is immovable and therefore permanent. So says the Gemara, let's go back in the Gemara. So let's say the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So says the Gemara, if I was to say the halacha was like Rabbi Yehuda, hava amina hanemili mita to the gaba asui. I might have thought that I was talking about a bed that was made to be underneath it. Yeah, that you look at Rashi. There's a Rashi here. The gaba asuye lischav al gaba. You might have thought that if we were to say the halakha is like Rabbi Yehuda, we might have thought that if the bed was made to be slept underneath, on it, v'lo tachtea, and not underneath it, lios lo ohel, then it will be an ohel. Hilkach lav shem ohel aleha. Therefore, in this situation, it doesn't have the status of an ohel. The time lav mishum arai, and not because it's temporary. Who ella lav shema ohel. The reason is because it doesn't have the status of an ohel. Yeah, it wasn't made for sleeping under, but on. Let's just see it inside. I might have thought that since it's the bed for sleeping on, not under, aval killer, but when it comes to a bed, when it comes to the killer, the tocha asui, that was made to be slept in under, yeah, or the tocha, yeah, under, because you've got the covering of the killer. Aimaloi, I might have thought no. What was he saying here? Make a distinction. An uncovered bed, a regular bed compared to a killer. A regular bed is made to be slept on. And therefore, there's no question there's an ohel or not an ohel, regardless of its dimensions or not. It's made to be slept on, meaning with nothing above you, just the schach. And therefore, even if you sleep underneath it, it's immaterial because it doesn't have the status of an ohel. But I might have thought that something which has the status of an ohel, because it was made to be slept underneath, so like the killer, which has the roof and the dimensions of 10 tefachim, which is made to be an ohel, has the status of an ohel, and it's made that the person sleeps underneath it, I might have thought that would be possible. Says the Gemara, Kamash Milan. Therefore, it comes to teach you no. It says the Gemara, Taima de Rabbi Yehuda. And what is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? Deloy asi ohel arai muvasal ohel keva. Because even though it's an ohel, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that since it's temporary, it cannot negate something which is permanent. So this killer, which although, yes, you're right, it is an ohel, it's a temporary ohel. And it cannot supersede the permanency of the sukkah itself. Therefore,
I'm tempted to ask though, if your plan is to sleep under a bed, presumably there's a space under the bed which is there to protect you from something. Isn't that the point of sleeping under a bed? That you're using it specifically to
protect you.
To block something above you.
Sure,
and surely it doesn't matter whether it's low or high, it's completely against the spirit of the sukkah.
100%. 100%. Let's go then let's look at the Mishnah then on Chof Amud Beis. Yeah, remember we said this was Shmuel's opinion.
Right.
Yeah? Look at the Mishnah. And Shmuel's, and what was Shmuel's, sorry, not Shmuel, sorry, Rabbi Yehuda. What was Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning is regardless of whether it's an ohel or not, he would
It's
say
not 10 tefachim high, therefore it's okay.
no. That's not the reason.
What
His
did he
reason
say?
is arai not arai.
Okay.
Because the bed is temporary in comparison to the sukkah, because it can be moved around the sukkah, it's a movable object. It doesn't supersede the permanent object. Permanency always takes precedence. Yeah, and therefore, if you sleep underneath it, it doesn't mean anything. It's as if it's not there because it's merely temporary in comparison to the sukkah itself. Yeah.
Yes, except the question which
that's
I'm
Yehuda,
asking.
that's Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning. But look at the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Hayashen tachas hamita b'sukkah lo yatsa yidei chovasoy. If you were to sleep underneath the bed in a sukkah, you've not fulfilled your obligation. That's the Tana Kama, the first opinion in the Mishnah. Along comes Rabbi Yehuda and says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Nagim hayinu shahinu yashenim tachas hamita b'fnei hazakenim v'lo amru lanum. We used to have a minhag of sleeping under the bed in the presence of the elders, and they didn't say anything to us. But you can see here, from the hanging aleph, the halacha is like the Tana Kama and not like Rabbi Yehuda. We paskin that you cannot sleep under a bed, even though it is temporary in comparison to the sukkah. Nevertheless, as Rashi explains why, Yashen lo yatsa, person sleeping underneath it has not fulfilled the obligation. Why? The ohel mafsik beino l'sukkah, because it is by definition an ohel. You cannot avoid that. Ohel arai, ohel kever, doesn't matter. We don't care whether it's permanent or not. It is an ohel. Once it's reached the din of an ohel, it's mafsik between you and the sukkah. It separates between you and the sukkah, and it's possible. The Ikka, says Rashi, Ikka yeshiva, and the essence of the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah is achila, shtia, v'shena, eating, drinking, and sleeping.
So that's my question, isn't it? That's valid then.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I said Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is different. We don't pass like Rabbi Yehuda, but we were bringing it in our Gemara just to show the distinction between this idea of the killer being something which does it have the din of an ohel or not? Is it considered to be arai or not? Yeah?
Yes.
But in terms of halacha, we don't pass like that. Okay? Right. So we are up to the next Mishnah on Yud Aleph Omid Aleph. Good place to stop.
Which page is this, the Hadran? Which one is that?
So that's the end of Perek. That was beginning of Perek Sheni, end of Perek Rishon.
Right.
Yeah, we're back on Yud Aleph Omid Aleph. Familiar. The next Mishnah, which we'll see, is familiar to us because we quoted it in the Gemara previously in relation to building a sukkah underneath a tree and raising the branches of the tree and mingling it with the schach. So it's going to be a fairly familiar Mishnah to us, and then we'll see the Gemara on that. Okay. All right, we'll leave that there.